Can you hear me? Okay, welcome back. I see we've lost a few people. I know they're outside. We'll start shortly here. But before we start, we're also trying some technological things here, right? So we have the live streaming going on, and we had set up a Google Doc for our people who are watching us on live stream for any questions. And we have 2 questions there, so we're going to try to answer it. I'm sorry to the presenters that we couldn't respond right on time when you sent them in. So the first question is, I have not seen diversity data for our unit. How is this data being disseminated, and how often will it be provided to units? And so the answer to this varies unit by unit, I think, about who gets the data and so on. But some of that might be explained by our next set of presenters, who are our campus data experts. And they will talk about how the data is being disseminated. So we may have to get more specific in terms of what kind of data you're referring to. And then there's a question specifically targeted to the presenters who discussed the temperature of the UFM campus. I wonder if you have strategies, or could you speak to help individuals who do not feel the heat, the uncomfortable climate, to start to see that it is hot. A fish in water doesn't know it's wet. So that's something to consider as we go forward. So with that, I'm going to invite John Kellogg to start with his presentation. Each presenter in this case will have 15 minutes. They have more material here to cover, and then we will have a Q&A at the end of the 4 presentations. Thank you.
Thank you. Say hello to everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm going to do sort of a pseudo-technical description of data at the U, kind of a simplified view. I'm coming from the position as sort of a power user of the data. I'm not truly a technical expert, and I'm not actually a high-end researcher. I'm sort of a report person, and I get down in the weeds in the data a lot, so I know a lot of the details. So I'm going to try to walk through and tell you where the data lives, where it comes from, what it looks like, and some ideas of how to get at it. So that's sort of the plan here. First, I'll just start with a data structure overview. This is, again, these are not the classical data symbols. They're just boxes, but I think you'll get the idea here. I'm going to talk about data that's system data that's in PeopleSoft. I'm not going to cover too much stuff coming from surveys or coming from shadow systems. This is all central university data, and we went to PeopleSoft in 1999. And at the top, I just have 4 examples of data tables that live in production. PS personal data contains a lot of demographic information, gender, citizenship status, things like that. PS diversity is not actually a production table, but it's where race ethnicity values are stored, and that's sort of the source for reporting and other research activities. And I just mentioned a couple others. PS student enroll, that's all the classes people take, and PSUM employees has a lot of HR-based data. And these all are live tables. They're updating constantly. So if you run a report off of these at noon and do it again at 2, it's going to be completely changed. So, and then what happens every evening, there's a direct copy made of all of these tables, and I lost track of the numbers. There's well over 5,000 of the PeopleSoft tables. And this is just so people aren't constantly hitting production, which can cause traffic issues. And then a lot of times it's every night, but it depends on the tables. There's Informatica jobs that run against the Snap tables that produce data warehouse tables that are designed for people to go against and do reporting. And that's the type of tables our office uses pretty much exclusively. We sometimes go against the Snap tables if there's things not in the data warehouse. Not everything in production makes it to the data warehouse. So there are things missing. So sometimes we have to go back and hit both of those tables. And these are some examples of data warehouse tables are out there. There's hundreds of them. Same thing, demo address, that has all the demographic information, gender, race, ethnicity, citizenship status, birth date, ages, that's all in there. Same with DWHR, except that's for employees. And then student enroll and student car term, which is term by term data, grade point averages, credits attempted, credits completed, GPAs, that's all stored in there. And I have what we call sticks files, and I have known about those for 40 plus years, and I still do not know exactly what sticks means. I have guesses, but I've never gotten a definitive answer. But those are tables that are created once or twice a term, and they're snaps, and we lock them down forever. So we have a trail going all the way back to 78 for these tables, and they never change. And that's sort of the official source for headcount enrollments. And that also includes gender, ethnicity, breaks like that. And these are the ones that are going to match what's on our website and what Board of Regents gets. And so numbers can always be in sync. Otherwise, if you go against the daily tables, they change all the time. So, and then IR Deg Confer are all degrees awarded, which is snapped once a year. And again, that's for federal and official reporting.
I'm going to give you another mic.
It's not coming through. I can put this closer.
This one will work better for.
Okay.
You can hold that if you want.
Okay. There we go. I can hear myself better, so that's good. And generally, these tables are what we use to spin off reports, dashboards, and ad hoc analyses. That's sort of the source of truth for what we do. And again, sometimes we tap the other ones. There's also thousands of other data sources people use. Some are in-house shadow systems. There's a new enterprise data warehouse being built, which is in the fact and dimension schema, as opposed to this, which is the relational database, which has been around for years, actually since '99 when they switched to PeopleSoft. So I'm going to show an example of the path of how race ethnicity gets into these tables. And I'm particularly talking about the student side. So for example, when a freshman applies for admission on the application, there's a question that has check boxes for pretty much all of the race ethnicity categories we collect. And you can check one or more of these. And there's a Hispanic Latino option in there also. So a student can report as many as they want. It's totally self-reported. Those are sort of electronically transmitted into a table called PS Diverse Ethnic. And this is a de-identified example of someone who had put in 3 checkboxes. So they actually have multiple rows in this table. And the primary indicator would signify which one is sort of their primary one to report on. In this case, I think the general rule is you do the least represented. And in this case, it would be American Indian. It's not always, I don't believe it's always 100% followed, but I don't know the actual computer logic that does that. So, and then once that, and at certain points in time, and I think this is done daily also, we create that table PS Diversity, which takes the vertical data and rotates it. So now we have a column for each race, ethnicity, category with yes/no flags in it. Much easier to program against than the multiple row table. And then the data warehouse tables tap this PS diversity table and create custom fields that are much easier to use. And that's the ones we generally use all the time. The STIX EGDESC short has been around forever. That's sort of the internal one value per person that's been used for years for trend reporting. And it segments out international students based on citizenship status. So there is not a self-reported international category. And that's sort of per federal regulations. And then there's the IPEDS ethnic code, which actually has a category for multi. And What happens there, let's say a student, and I'll use Morris as an example, there's a significant number of students there who self-report, say, American Indian and white or Caucasian. And when we report to the feds, that's going to show up as multi, but you don't know which multi it came from. So that kind of dilutes the individual categories, and that's an issue. But in the system, we do know what they are, so you can go back and segment them out and look up all the details. So, and that's, again, there's lots of data warehouse tables that carry this information. And we can go into the details in the facilitation if we want to get into the weeds on that. So, data access points, how do you get at all this data? There's a reporting center which has lots of sort of operational list type reports you can get on if you need daily information to do your business processes. There's our OIR website, which I'll flip through some categories here shortly. And then our office can also help with research consultation. If you don't know how to get at data or you want to have some ideas, you're not sure the best way to get at it, we can help with that. Or actually become involved with helping you pull the data and conduct the research, depending on resources and what you're looking for. We also can help with ad hoc data requests. We get lots of calls that, how do I get this information? And we can either point them to the right place or even help out or maybe produce a prototype that you can use. So, or you can jump in and request access to the data warehouse tables themselves and dive right in. And access is granted on a need to know for your job duties. It's not just out of curiosity if you need to get at that information. It's approved, and there's student, admissions, HR, lots of tables. And it requires some degree of SQL knowledge. There are point and click tools, but from experience, if you go beyond a simple query, that's very difficult to do. It would take you 4 hours to point and click and drag and drop. So. This is just a screen snap of our main website. It was recently converted to Drupal. It shows all the different links we have. It's basically reports, dashboards of sorts that you can go in. And these are official numbers, and this is a public data site. Meaning everybody in the world has access to this. So again, these are the types of student data we carry, official enrollment stats. That comes out of the STIX files that I talked about before. Enrollment map by home location, you can tell where students come from around the world, where they were at the point of application. We have historical data, new entering freshmen, degrees, certificates. Those are all contained on our website. Just point and click, and these are sort of set reports. And a lot of it is now in Tableau, so you can download those reports to Excel. This is just an example of an official enrollment report by race ethnicity. This is the single value per person. You don't see a multi here. And at the top, you can drill down to different terms and campuses and student levels like undergrad, grad, professional. This is a separate example showing the multi-category. You can see how many have selected more than one when they self-reported. We carry both. An example of categories, student of color versus everyone else. We also have roll-up reports like this, so you don't have to add up the numbers yourself if you need it for any sort of reporting. Also by gender, male, female, unknown. One side story, when we report to the feds, we are not allowed to report gender unknown. So there's initially a program that runs against these unknown numbers, takes the person's first name, goes against all first names at the U that match, and take the predominant gender and assign it to it. And it always leaves a few left over, and then those are manually checked to see if we can figure out what's the likely gender and assign that. So the other way the feds allow us to do it is by ratios. We can take the unknowns, but we've chosen to do the assignment route, which is used by other schools also. Just another example showing new entering freshmen broken out by race ethnicity. We have this on our site also. Degrees awarded, same basic thing. A trend showing male-female for degrees awarded. And same thing for HR by employee of color, white or unknown, and international. This is probably, I don't know how much time I have, but this is a good point to talk about the issue of data privacy. Okay. A lot of questions we get are, why don't we have these drill down further to like department or major or things like that. And one issue on a public website is data privacy. If we drill down further, you're going to get cell sizes of 1 and 2 and 3, and then legally that's protected data, and someone could reasonably tie it to an individual, so we cannot produce those. It's possible to do these reports where you block the low numbers, but if anybody has tried to do that with a big table, it's endless. There's no program you can do that with. So you have 50% of them are now blocked. So sometimes if you only have one value in a row, you can extrapolate it, so that doesn't work, and they have actually white papers written on how to do this. So that's a big issue. Then segue into the data privacy. These are links to some of the legal and policy rules about data privacy, but it's very important. This is an example on the student side of what is public. These are just a few items that are releasable publicly. Like if someone requests a list from us of current enrolled students with this information, we can release that, excluding those who have suppressed any of this information. Pretty much everything else besides that is confidential data, and you have to be very careful about who gets to see that and how you release it. And all of these items we've talked about, race, ethnicity, gender, citizenship, those are all protected pieces of information. Bring up the rule of 5. When you do a pivot table or a crosstab, generally if a cell is less than 5, that's potentially a problem. So you have to, when in doubt, you should check that. If you're at a high enough level, it's still okay to release it. Like our sticks tables reports, you can show less than 5 because it's only at the college and campus level. But if you go down further or crisscross it with gender, that rule doesn't apply anymore, then you cannot release it. So I just want to emphasize the importance of data privacy, because it can be a big issue if it's incorrectly used. So, and that was my end. So hopefully I came in just under the wire. Oh. Thank you.
Krista is next.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I'll be fast. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Krista Soria. I work with the Office of Institutional Research. I've worked with many of you individually, and it's really a great honor to be here and to see you all. This is a really great group of folks. I hope you acknowledge how very rad you all are. I hope you see that. And anyway, it's so very exciting for me to be here. I think STIX might stand for Students Title IX. The IX might be Roman numerals. Yeah. Okay, go for it. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So, yeah, anyway. I'm here to talk about the SERU survey. The SERU stands for Student Experience in the Research University Survey. It's a multi-institutional survey. This map is actually a little bit old, but we've got over 20 different institutions who are part of our consortium, at least in the US, and it's also an international survey as well, so pretty exciting. These are just a handful of some of the institutions, and again, I think the list might be slightly outdated by now, but we're joined in the consortium by lots of other large public research universities, quite similar to the University of Minnesota in terms of mission and scope. We have administered the SERU on our campus since 2010. I'm the person whom you can contact about the SERU. I administer it. I send out the obnoxious emails to students. And I also analyze the data. So I would be your primary contact for the undergrad data. In 2017, we had quite a banner year where we had one of our highest response rates ever. So it's a really great, rich source of data. The SERU has over 600 items. Students don't all answer all 600 items. We have some modules that we randomly assign to students. All the students get the core of the survey, which is about 150 items, and then we randomly assign students to different sections. In last year's wildcard module, we asked a lot of items related to campus climate, and those items, some of which are, they're different items, but a lot of campus climate items also come from the core of the survey as well. So a very, very rich source of data on the undergraduate student experience. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the items that may be relevant to your work today. In my afternoon session, I'm going to be sharing the actual data from students' responses. And not the whole thing, because I could literally create like 3-hour-long campus climate presentations from these data, because it's a very rich source of data, as I keep saying, but just some very quick snapshots. So one, we collect a lot of really great demographic data in the SERU survey that are not captured elsewhere. So one example is gender identity. We do ask beyond the binary. So we ask students to indicate if they are, and this item has changed and is continuing to evolve to be more inclusive. But for instance, in 2017, we asked if students were trans female, trans male, gender queer, non-conforming, in addition to male and female. We also asked students what sex was listed on their birth certificate as well. So definitely getting insights into students that we don't capture institutionally, that we don't sort of state it, as Melinda mentioned earlier, on the admissions forms, right? So this is a great source of data on students who do not identify within the binary categories. Additionally, we also capture data on sexual orientation. So one of the only places that this is collected at the university, and again, a really rich source of data. Religious affiliation or spiritual affiliation, political affiliation, disability. So I know Cynthia mentioned we don't really do a lot of disability data stuff, but we do actually have some in the SERU survey. And it is one of those items that we're getting better at, and we keep changing it with every iteration of the SERU as well. Again, to be more inclusive and a better, sort of more accurate representation of the experiences of students. Student social class, which I literally wrote my dissertation about if anybody wants to talk about that and be bored. Students' parental education, and we've asked this question in multiple different ways over the last couple of years, but there's a lot to be said when we look beyond students just first generation or non-first generation. When we look into the experiences of even the first gen students, there's big differences between those whose parents only went to high school and that's it, and the students who had parents who went to some college or did some associate's degree work. There's big differences in students there, or even students whose parents did not graduate from high school. So that's a really great source of data too. Family income, housing, which is really interesting. So where do you live? What type of housing? So a home, an apartment, on campus, off campus, fraternities, sororities. And then where? So how far from campus? And then who do you live with? Which I think is also really interesting. Because students who live off campus, let's say sharing an apartment with another University of Minnesota student, have a different experience, as I've found in the analyses, than students who live off campus in an apartment with another peer who is not a University of Minnesota student. So super interesting stuff there. And then, as I mentioned, how far they live from campus. We also have more, but I just didn't want to, but these are sort of the big categories, and they're really relevant to campus climate work in particular. So from the core of the survey, one of our most informative items that we've asked over the last couple of years are students of my blank, and those are the fill in for the blanks, are respected on this campus. We used to ask this item, students are respected here regardless of their race or ethnicity, but we've changed it to be a little bit more, one, inclusive, so not respected regardless of, but students of my identity are respected on this campus. And that changed the data and the results a little bit, but we've done this now for a couple of years, so we have some really great comparative data, which I will talk about this afternoon. And then a few more items. So overall, I feel comfortable with the climate for diversity and inclusiveness. The University of Minnesota is a safe and secure campus, and the University of Minnesota is a welcoming campus. Also related, I feel valued as an individual, and I feel that I belong at this university. We find really strong associations, and this is true in the literature, and like I've published stuff on this too, strong associations between students' perceptions of campus climate and their sense of belonging. And we also know on this campus from the SERU that sense of belonging is a really important predictor of students' retention, as is campus climate, which I will talk about this afternoon. So campus climate matters, right? It's very important. So from our wildcard, we've asked a number of items, one of which is whether students, their social interactions are largely confined to students of their race or ethnicity, whether the university provides an environment for the free and open expression of ideas, opinions, and beliefs, whether the university and other top administrators, the president and other top administrators are effective leaders in promoting diversity, and a long, very lengthy statement that I'm not going to read aloud, but it's about the curriculum and whether it's sort of inclusive, right? And whether it provides an opportunity to learn about people from a wide variety of different backgrounds and traditions. Additionally, in the wildcard, we ask how much do these groups value diversity? And we've got a couple of groups that students report on. So they're fellow students, faculty members, administrators, staff, student government, and then the campus community overall. And as I will share this afternoon, there are differences in students' responses for each of these groups. So very interesting data that we've learned. I did this one backwards. And we also ask, this is like 3 sets of items. So one item is, in this academic year, I have heard teaching faculty or instructors say negative or stereotypical things, express negative or stereotypical views about, and then each of those social identities is then represented. So we ask them that for faculty, for staff, and then for students. So there's really like 18 items that are expressed here. And again, this afternoon, I will show that there are very unique differences with regards to where students are encountering these negative and stereotypical points of view, and then from whom they're encountering these negative or stereotypical points of view. And so in addition to campus climate, we also ask a lot of diversity-related questions related to students' development and growth related to diversity issues, in addition to some areas related to perspective taking. So please rate your proficiency in the following areas when you started and then now. And so one is appreciating the importance of diversity and conveying this value to others. Another is understanding and respecting the values and beliefs in others. And you might recognize these as coming from the student development outcomes. So there's 7 SDOs, right? 7 SLOs, student learning outcomes. And a few of those have to do with diversity and awareness and appreciation of others. So we asked those items in the SERU survey, and they're really important. So another one, how much growth and development do you feel you've made in the following areas since you started? Understanding diverse philosophies and cultures, and then understanding the viewpoints of others from different societies. And those are related to the SLOs on campus. So those are embedded in sort of the foundation of the institution, and I think are really critical to thinking about broader conversations of campus climate too. So not only what are students experiencing, but what are students taking away with them as a result of their experiences at the U? Wait, a lot more. So how frequently during the academic year have you interacted from students outside of the U.S. in class, outside of class? How often have you developed friendships with students? I wrote a paper a couple of years ago about internationalizing the curriculum, and it's about internationalization at home. So instead of sort of sending students away to study abroad and get these cross-cultural interactions, can we have them on campus and get students gain a lot from them? And they do, and these are very important for students. So I encourage you to Google Scholar that paper. But these are super important, right? So they're important to ask about. And then please rate your level of proficiency in the following areas. So understanding complexities of global issues, ability to work with people from other cultures, comfort working with people from other cultures. So we do ask a lot of globally themed and intercultural items too. And that it's really important, I think, to consider how campus climate impacts other aspects of the student's experience. So is campus climate associated with students' academic engagement, with their sense of belonging? Yes, I know that to be true of the data. Their overall satisfaction if they're involved on campus, their political engagement, civic engagement, community engagement. These are all really great things that we can do with the SERU data. I've connected SERU data to retention, GPA, graduation, student learning and development outcomes. It's a rich source of data that we can use to look at not only the, what students' perceptions of climate are like, but then what are the impacts? What are the outcomes? Who cares, right? So what? It shows up in the data. It's very important. So a couple of ways of accessing the SERU data. We had previously an online platform similar to sort of what John was showing online, where you could go in and look by college and look at students' responses. When we converted to Drupal, we lost that, and we're rebuilding a new one. So in the time being, you can contact me for SERU data, and I hope you will find that to be a fun meeting. So those of you I met with, I hope you've had a good time. You guys know I geek out about this stuff, right? So at least it's like an energetic meeting, maybe. But I'm very happy to assist you with looking at campus climate data specific to your department. We can drill down to academic majors. We can look at all these wonderful demographic data to see how students are, having different experiences in your units and areas, and then the outcomes of those as well. So I always think about these presentations as like the start of a conversation, right? That's my C, is a conversation. So let's have a conversation, and I'd be happy to meet with you. Thank you.
Next speaker is Daniel Jones-White. Also from institutional research.
Thank you for having me today. As Virajita mentioned, my name is Daniel Jones-White. I'm a senior analyst in the Office of Institutional Research. I'm also the Research and Development Director for the GradSERU survey, and we'll spend the next 15 minutes sort of telling you a little bit about that. Many of you may not know that the GradSERU survey has its origination here at the University in Minnesota. In 2013, 2014, there were discussions on campus about developing a sort of central survey that would be administered to graduate students. The concern was that at the time, the only survey of graduate students on campus was sort of administered by COGS, so there was no centrally administered one, leaving sort of administrators without the data that they needed. And the graduate students at the time were also sort of having problems, resource issues in terms of analyzing the data that they had. So a large group of us got together and sort of started having these discussions about whether or not there was value in sort of creating such a survey. This included individuals from student affairs, from public engagement, from the Writing Center, from the libraries, from ISSS. And there's a general agreement that we wanted to sort of proceed and move forward. And that sort of effort evolved into what is now the GradSERU survey. So 2013, 2014 was about instrument development. We then administered the survey we piloted the survey for the first time in fall of 2014, both at the University of Minnesota and at the University of Virginia. And we got back the results, and we were generally satisfied with what was returned. But one of the things that we began to notice is that the survey did a pretty good job collecting the information around traditional graduate education, so the kind of graduate education our parents would have had. But it wasn't doing as well of job capturing sort of the new skills that students in sort of modern graduate education need to be successful in their post-completion plans. So we spent a year going back to the survey, redesigning, including new elements, redesigning some of the scales, and then administered a second pilot in spring of 2016. We felt much more comfortable about that survey, and then started to share that, especially with some of our international colleagues. Because one of the things that GradSERU does is not just administer the survey to American institutions or North American institutions, but it also administers it in sort of Europe and potentially Japan and China. And we needed to make sure that the way that we were thinking about graduate education coincides with the way that their graduate education experiences are. One huge difference was here we talk about students as being, here we talk about the people taking the survey as being graduate students. In Europe, in the Netherlands, for example, that nomenclature doesn't exist. They're not students, right? So they're candidates, doctoral candidates. So a lot of the language that we had built into the survey had to be revised and localized to make it sort of adapt. So we did that over in summer and fall in 2016. And then we launched the survey live for the first time in fall of 2017. 5 institutions in North America administered the survey this year. That includes the University of Minnesota, Michigan State University, which is actually collecting the data right now, University of Toronto in Canada, University of Pittsburgh, and the University of Delaware, as well as 2 institutions in Europe, Utrecht University in the Netherlands, and Bremen University in Germany. We made an intentional decision because we thought that recruitment was going to be a little bit slow at the beginning to not change the survey between 2017 and 2018 with the goal of being able to sort of aggregate that data into a single common data set. That we'd best be able to sort of leverage the sort of comparative data that we were looking for. Because what the value of the GradSERU is a great survey, but most institutions can develop a survey maybe even better than the one that we have. Where a lot of the value from GradSERU comes from is the ability to contextualize the information that you're getting back, right? Now we know how students feel about campus climate, not just at Minnesota, but how that compares to how students feel at Michigan State and at Pittsburgh, providing a much deeper understanding into where there may be issues that we want to address and where there may be successes that we want to applaud. So in 2018, we're currently actively recruiting institutions. We currently have 3 that have signed on to participate for sure. That includes University of Iowa, University of Göttingen in Germany, and Lund University in Sweden, bringing the total number of participants up to 8 currently. As Krista was mentioning, for the undergrad SERU, the GradSERU shares a sort of similar design element in that there's a single core that is administered to all students that's represented by the circle in the center. This includes, the topics covered in this area include academic and research and teaching engagement, issues of financial support and affordability, learning outcomes and development, campus climate, career plans and aspirations, obstacles and barriers to completion, and satisfaction, and issues and questions about student satisfaction and sense of belonging. But there's also a module design that is given to subsets of students. This is determined based on the university, but here we sort of administer we assign the modules based on the size of the program. So individuals that were enrolled in small programs were asked to take all the modules. Individuals that were in large programs, we would just randomly have samples, so only half would have to take each one. And then individuals in medium programs, we did sort of a random 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 sample. So 1/3 would take one, 1/3 would take the other, and a third 1/3 would take both of them, giving us sort of 2/3 responding to each section. And the reason for this is that one of the difference from, and John mentioned the rule of 5, and that's a similar rule for what we do in undergrad, is we as the designers, and also we've had several conversations on campus, want to make sure that when we present these data that we do everything we can to protect students from the potential for retribution or retaliation, right? We want them to feel their utmost confidence that they can sort of provide feedback on these experiences and not potentially be punished for that. So we have a much stricter standard for what's reported back out. We have the rule of 9. So program level data is not reported if there is less than 9 students that responded to the survey. And that's sort of how we've approached reporting to this point. So the module design, currently there's 3. There's one on health and well-being, which sort of asks students about their time use, their physical and mental health and well-being, sources of stress, and questions about academic incivility, discrimination, and harassment. We also have a professional development section, which is largely based on some of the work from Stanford's graduate professional development there's a name for it, but sort of tries. But it tries to sort of identify 6 different areas and 3 sort of sub areas that we're trying to sort of get much better information about whether or not students are getting the new types of skills that we believe they need in the sort of modern marketplace, as well as an international students section, which talks about sort of socialization and difficulties with interacting with faculty, staff, and fellow students. So just to overview what's some of the information that's in the campus climate section, it's sort of broken into 3 sections. The first is about program climate, where we ask students to sort of rate how they feel the climate of their program is. So we ask them how strongly they disagree or agree with questions such as that faculty respect students regardless of their background, student respects students regardless of their background, that rules and regulations are fair, that rules and regulations are equitably applied, that faculty encourage expression of diverse viewpoints from students, open lines of communications, that students are given an active role in departmental decisions, sense of solidarity amongst students, and overall the sort of program climate is positive and welcoming. So we feel like this first sort of set of questions is really about trying to have the student respond back to how they feel the climate of their program is. The second set of questions focuses a little bit more about sense of belonging as it relates to climate. So here we ask students whether or not they have friends in their program, whether or not they believe they belong in their program, whether or not other people believe that they belong in their program, to sort of get a sense of where some discrimination may be encouraged or may be occurring. Questions about whether they believe their department creates a collegial and supportive environment, whether the faculty is available to talk to them. So here is, we're sort of trying to sort of get at that intersection of, or the interaction between what the program's doing and how they're sort of how they fit in. And then the final section is more specifically on sort of targeting populations or what we would sort of define as historically underserved or underrepresented populations in higher education. So here we ask students to assess how strongly they disagree or agree with a series of 7 statements that females are that the climate for female students is at least as good as it is for male, that it for international students is at least as good as for domestic students, racial ethnic minorities is at least as good to non-minority students, LGBT to non-LGBT, disabled students to non-disabled students, religious minority students to non-religious minority. And then one of the things that we had to sort of be cognizant of is that the question of underserved varies by program. So when dealing with the nursing program, men are generally the less served program. So that was one of the items that we added this year, was that the sort of climate for men or males was equal for women. And that's specifically to try to get at some of these other specific programs. So using GradSERU, the most easily accessible access point for GradSERU is a series of Tableau dashboards that we've created on the AHC server. We provide credentialing information to all university, collegiate, and program level leadership. As just a de facto, we look up those, Brad Bostrom provides me a list of those names. We automatically credential them. They can then go on to, the Z-link is z.umn.edu/GradSERU 2016 climate, and they would be able to go and see these series of tables there. But that's not everybody that can have it. I mean, the data is open to anyone that has a need. So oftentimes, if people that aren't, administrative leaders contact me and say, I would like access, I simply say, if you can have someone from your office send me a note that says that you can be granted access, I'm happy to credential you as well. But what this allows you to do, and what the Tableau server allows you to do, is to sort of jump in and start to look at the data and sort of position where a college or a program sort of is situated, is situated compared to its peers. And that's something that the graduate school has begun using in their annual collegiate reports, which is something new that they're doing this year, in which they provide a wealth of data, but some of it using GradSERU to try and sort of point out where colleges are strong and where there may be some areas for improvement going forward. And to sort of see what that looks like, here's an example. And you have for a college, for university climate, here we have areas of improvement, and they identify, some areas where it looks like CLA sort of falls behind the other colleges on campus. So, for the first item, it is, to what extent do you agree or disagree with the following statement about your experience that faculty treat students fairly regardless of their gender. CLA, I mean, the potential would be CLA might say, hey, we're 89%, that's pretty great. And that isn't necessarily bad, but when compared to all the other campuses, they're pretty far to the left on that distribution, indicating that there may be some more that they can do to help improve those perceptions by students. So the point of this, and I would suggest maybe talking to Dean Lanyon, but I think the goal is for this information is to start conversations, to sort of provide people with information that they can sort of engage with and respond to and begin to think about in a really sort of practical and tactile way. So the examples of sort of what we're able to do with the data includes we can compare colleges, which is what we were just sort of showing. So we can say how well is one college doing compared with another college. Breaking it down a little bit further, we can also do this within programs, right? So we can sort programs within a college to say, all right, let's see how OLPD and CEHD compares to ed psychology and other programs in the college and assess where they lie on the distribution, as well as one of the things that we're working on going forward now that we have additional institutions participating is that we can now start to compare similar programs across colleges, right? So we can say how do our, how are our social science, this isn't maybe the best sort of description, but what you could do is say, how does our political science and government programs compare to the programs at the University of Pittsburgh, at Toronto, and sort of allow you to assess that on an item-by-item basis. So there we can sort of start to contextualize what this information means, because it is helpful to know that, sort of 87% of students are satisfied with their experience, but without sort of knowing, what that means in the context of graduate education at large, it's hard to really design the appropriate interventions. If it's the case that everybody else is way far to the right, then we need to think about some additional interventions that we might be able to do to sort of move that to sort of try and match our peers. If we find that we're an outlier to the right, then we may need to sort of, then we have opportunities to think about, hey, what's working, and maybe trying to share that with other institutions as well. So I think that's it. Yeah, if you have questions about GradSERU, please feel free to contact me. I will be facilitating one of the sessions where we will be demonstrating some of the dashboards live, and I'm happy to sort of take your feedback and answer any questions. So thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Brandon Sullivan from the Office of Human Resources.
All right, how's this? A little echoey. No? Kind of echoey. Further down? How's that? Better? Oh, still, okay. All right, well, I'm excited to be here today. This is, sorry. Does this work? No? More towards the podium? Sorry. So like this? Oh, it feels so official now. All right, great. Oh, sure.
See, this is really far away, so that makes the volume go up, and then it will echo more.
Okay. How's this? All right, excellent. Perfect. So, so like I was saying, it's very exciting to be here as part of this today. I've done a lot of work throughout my career with survey data and other type of institutional data in the private sector and now here at the university. And one of the biggest challenges that I see is there's so much data and it's siloed. It's over here, and then you have people trying to make decisions, trying to make improvements, and how do they do that with the data? And then the data doesn't get used where it really would be useful. So it's very exciting to be seeing this movement here at the university to try to bring all of this data together to try to address a really important issue. So I want to talk just a little bit about the employee engagement survey. And this afternoon, my colleague Jennifer Engler and I are going to do a deeper dive into this. If you're interested, please join us. But the engagement survey is really based on two key ideas. And it's really about the local work environment. The first idea is that there are some basic elements that we know about from research and science about what makes up an effective and supportive workplace, and that we can measure those, or we can measure people's perceptions of those. That's the first key concept. The second is that the way you make improvements in the local work environment is through a constant cycle of input from the people who work in that work environment, talking about what does that input mean, the context, the goals of the department or the unit, and then doing something with that information that actually makes things better. So those are the two key concepts that are really behind the employee engagement survey. And prior to this survey, the university did what was called the Pulse survey, and you may have taken it prior to this. And that was really a very eclectic survey. It was more of a job satisfaction survey. It was very long. It had a lot of items on it. And so we wanted to create a survey that was more focused and focused on those elements that we know are important for a good work environment. And so that was kind of the backstory to that. This slide shows you the specific kind of elements that we're measuring on the engagement survey. These aren't survey items, but these are kind of descriptions of what we're measuring with the survey. And the way that we created this model and created the survey itself was 2 steps. First, we started with research. There's a ton of research out there on what makes for an effective work environment. We already know that stuff pretty well. What we didn't know coming into that is, what does that look like at the University of Minnesota? What does that look like for faculty, right? Because faculty roles are very different, and academic units, departments, colleges are very different from the types of organizations that a lot of this research was done in. And so what we did is we assembled a group of faculty across a whole bunch of different areas. Some of them had expertise in this topic, some of them didn't, but represented different areas of the university. And we started talking about, okay, here's what the research says is really important in the workplace. What does that look like for you in your departments, in your colleges? How would you describe this? Ultimately, how do we get to a survey item that's going to make sense and be actionable? And over the course of quite a few different discussions and gathering a lot of information and talking about the research, we landed on these, and like I said, these aren't the survey items, but these are descriptions of those key factors. And there is other research that has been done in higher education and even on research productivity in departments, and it all tells a similar story about what those key factors are. And interestingly, engagement, when we talk about employee engagement, it gets very personal for people. And that's one of the things that can make it, I think, at least in my experience, a little different than talking about, say, student data. If you're sitting down with deans, department chairs, faculty, staff, and talking about employee engagement, it's going to get personal pretty quickly. And one of the things that illustrated this early on was I had this group of faculty members who were advising this process and helping me create this survey. Several of them were on that committee specifically because they had expertise in this sort of thing, right? So they study this. Most of the discussion, however, was about their personal experience in their departments with their colleagues, with their deans, with their department chairs, because it was personal. So actually it didn't turn into a research discussion as much as it turned into what actually was a good thing is, how do I experience this? People get very passionate when you start talking about engagement, which is one of the challenges actually of doing some of this work. So this is just a quick discussion or a presentation of those items. This is the model that we use. It's sort of the marketing model, right, of the survey. This is how we sort of boil it down for people when they're looking at the data. So what you see there under the drivers, the idea is these are the factors that really contribute to a level of commitment and dedication, contribute to an effective workplace. And each of those they're sort of labels, right? Underneath each of those are survey items. So clear and promising direction has survey items underneath it, and so on. And the idea is that those drivers are factors that you can take action on at the local level. You can measure that and say, okay, how do people feel about these? Where do we have opportunity for improvement that would really help us advance our goals? And then that will lead to, presumably, an increase in commitment and dedication to the work and to the organization and the effectiveness of the work environment. It's hard to go in and directly get people more committed, right? You can sit people down and say, be more committed. that's not really how it works, right? You want to create the conditions that allow them to feel supported, allow them to be productive, allow them to leverage their strengths and these kinds of things. And that's really what the drivers are about. And the purpose of the survey is to provide people's, or to measure people's perceptions of those at the local level. The other piece to this, so the survey itself gets a lot of attention, and survey items always get a huge amount of attention. I've spent a good portion of my career sitting with different groups and committees wordsmithing survey items. And certainly survey items are important. You want to have good survey items that measure the right things and do that accurately. But when it comes to employee engagement, the survey items honestly are far less important than the process. And the process is captured in this diagram here. And we'll go into a little bit of detail on that this afternoon and what this looks like and what each step involves. But it's really about gathering input, and the survey is just a tool to do that. There are other ways to do it. The survey is one way to get a lot of input very quickly, but it's really a discussion starter. It's to frame up a discussion, typically at a local level, about how are things going, what's going well, what's not going well. And then taking action, picking a couple of things and doing something about it. And the important part is it's collective action, right? It's not just a leader picking, we're doing this, or it's also not just an individual employee saying, hey, we should do this. It's everybody together talking about, here's what we said, and here's what's important, and what can we do to move this forward. And I have to say, the survey items are important, but a moderate survey item that's used in this way is going to do a lot more good than the best survey item in the world that just sits there, right? So that's something that we really emphasize as we're doing this work. The survey process itself has quite a few different steps to it. So we've done it 4 times now. We did it first in 2013, 14, 15. People got a little survey fatigue there, so we took a break for a year. We just finished the 4th one. There are separate faculty and staff surveys, and now that's not entirely true because they're about 90% the same. The factors that drive engagement for faculty and staff are not really different, but some of the terminology is a little different. For example, with faculty, you don't generally ask about their supervisor or manager. They might ask about their department head, department chair, stuff like that. They're short. The survey is short, it's 36 items. That was one of the things that was really important to us, is we're not trying to design an assessment tool that's a diagnosis tool. It's something to really gather some key input to start conversations. It is externally managed. The survey data goes to the survey vendor, and that is to protect confidentiality. Nobody at the university, myself included, has any access to identified data. And that's something that has been really foundational for this. When I started developing the engagement survey back in 2013, everybody I talked to had concern about confidentiality. So that's why we did it. That's one of the reasons that we did it this way. If I called up our survey vendor and said, I want to know who said this, they would refuse to do that. And so there's a lot of importance around that confidentiality. All benefits eligible University of Minnesota faculty and staff are given the opportunity to take the survey. So people who are not benefits eligible don't. Every year we have conversations about that and different pros and cons to including other groups, but that's where we are with that. The data rollout, and this is a little different than some of the other data sources that we're talking about. So the data rolls out first in January to deans, chancellors, vice presidents, so senior leaders of the colleges, campuses, and units. And they'll get a look at their data and their teams, so it's not just them and their teams get their look at their data. And then by the end of January, all of the other data will roll out. And we have a potential of about 3,000 reports that will go out. We dropped the N size for reporting from 10 to 5 this year, so about twice as many will get reports as before. One of the things we heard loud and clear as we're doing this work is more, people want data. And we had departments that would have 8 responses, and they'd say, well, the college level data isn't helpful to us because we're our own department. So we're dropping that to 5. And so I think that'll be a good thing, but it means a lot of people are going to be getting data, which I think is a good thing. The response rate to the survey has been I have to say, amazing. When I worked in the private sector, this would be highly disappointing data, but working at a large university, this is very encouraging. And there's always cynicism and eye rolling when I go talk about engagement, particularly in the academic units. But as you can see, faculty are really taking the survey. In fact, we had a lot of colleges, over 70% of the faculty took the survey this year. So that's been one of the great things about this, is people are giving input, they're using this as a tool for having voice. And in the end then, when the data comes back, if a dean, a department head is looking at data and it's like, this was almost all of your faculty and staff, that carries a lot of weight, right? They're a lot more interested than if, 20%. That's a harder sell, sort of. So this has been, participation rates are just participation rates, but this has been a really good thing, I think, for getting that cycle going of input, discussion, and action. This is just an example of some of the way that we've used the data for things like campus climate, looking at diversity. So as part of the College Made process, we share with each college dean the data for their faculty and staff on the engagement survey broken out by racial and ethnic group. And each college has a different story, and we put the data together with other data points, because the engagement data is not a diagnosis kind of a tool, right? It's to start conversation, it needs to be put in context, it needs to be combined with other data to really make sense and point towards action. But it's one of the only data sources that we have at the university that is system-wide, and really allows you to get a sense for, at the local level, at the department level, how are faculty and staff experiencing their work environment. The data that you see here, this is real data. It's just an example. This is from the 2015 survey. It's all faculty and assistant, associate, and full professor job codes across all 5 system campuses. And this is just one item. We have a few items that we highlight as kind of climate indicators. And this is the item I'm treated with respect as an individual. The green shows you the percent who responded favorably, which would be an agree or strongly agree response. The yellow is the percent who responded neutrally, and then the red are the percent who responded unfavorably. And so you can see here, you can break it out by faculty of color, white faculty. You can also break it down further than that. One of the challenges, if you look at the table there, and the survey responses. And this is a little bit easier on the staff side. The numbers in some areas are a little bit higher, but on the faculty side, there just are not that many faculty in a lot of those groups. So this is system-wide data from 2015. So as soon as you start trying to break that down by college even, in many colleges, we cannot break the data down into these groups because the sample sizes get too small. And at the department level, there's no way. So that is a challenge. But that's where combining this with other data and using this as a conversation starter, as a focus for talking about what some of the challenges are, what the goals are, what the issues are in a college, it is useful information in that way. And when you look at some of the other items, you can start to see where some of the kind of specific issues might be. And so this is data that, and I would add, the response rate is really critical here, because the more people respond to the survey, the more we're able to kind of look at breakdowns of data at the college level, which is where I think it's really the most useful. Institution-wide data is interesting, can be helpful, but I think a lot of the action really is more at the college level. And so this afternoon then we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of this, talk a little bit more about how this data is being used. And I will just end with, we have pretty good data now that where colleges are taking action on the engagement data, engagement is going up and faculty and staff are feeling better about their workplace. So that's very encouraging. So anyway, thank you for listening and look forward to more conversation later. Thanks. Uh-oh.
So we have a few minutes for questions from the audience. I see a hand up, and maybe I will pass. Krista, do you want to come up here? Maybe you two can join.
Hi, yeah, I was just wondering about, it seems like ever since September 11th, we've had issues, there have been issues around the treatment of Middle Eastern and people from Middle Eastern and Arab countries and assumptions about them. And yet they're never included in these categories, and I don't know whether they're counted as white or Asian or unknown or what, and it seems like something we ought to be looking at.
That's a good point. I'll say that we do have, within the religious and spiritual preference, we've got Muslim students, which might help us to get a little bit more in that direction. Although, of course, not all Middle Eastern folks are Muslim necessarily, right? But that is one marginalized population that we, in society, and has come up not only after 9/11, but again, recently in our culture, right? And so that is one area in which we can sort of begin to identify those folks. But you're right, in the racial and ethnic categories, at least when it comes to students, that is not, and nor is, for instance, Indian students, right? And so many other kind of racial and ethnic groups, they just get really subsumed into this other category. And for a lot of our international students too, we just say international, right? At least in a lot of the reports that I do, we don't go into what country are you from, right? And so that's another sort of area where I think we could use some additional data desegregation, when it comes to our analyses, for sure. I don't know if anybody else has anything.
The only caveat to that is that
Because we're being recorded, you need that.
yeah, well, and we also, so one is we have requirements for what we have to report, so that's why we do things some ways. But the other thing is that protecting anonymity, when you start to finally sort of identify these individuals, becomes very sort of difficult. And that's one of the reasons why we don't always get the best measures that we want to, is because we know that we need to make sure that the responses that come back aren't able to be sort of tagged back to any individual students to protect them from retribution and retaliation. So I think, in a perfect world, we would love to collect that information, but, collecting that information in a way that protects the students is difficult. And I would worry that in the current climate as well, asking the student to identify some religious, may sort of, may feel off-putting to them. So.
And there, along those lines, thanks. Sort of along those lines, nationally, there's a trend when students are applying for admissions not to indicate a race or ethnicity because they don't want to be discriminated from the get-go when it comes to their admissions applications. And so there is, I think, sort of a trend in folks asking, why are you asking for this information? And that's come up a lot, even in some of the gender and sexual orientation items. Students are continually questioning back to us, why are you asking us that, this really important private information? Birth and sex, has come up quite a bit. So,
actually, as a follow-up to John, so in PeopleSoft, there are boxes like these that people have the opportunity to check off. Who decides what those boxes are, and what's that process, and how often is it revisited?
I know I can speak to the undergraduate side. It's changed. There was a couple changes made just recently, and I can't say specifically who made the decision, but it came through the admissions office, and I know there were others that were involved, but there was a concern, there's always been a concern about making it too complicated, where you have so many values, people are going, I'm not filling this out. It's just going to take me a half hour to figure out what I'm supposed to check. But I know part of it's due to the Common App that undergraduates fill out versus the in-house app. And I know they added some additional breaks that are not part of the standard categories, and those are being stored in a different place in PeopleSoft, and they're not part of the general, like, PS diversity table. But I do know they were very extensively discussed. I don't know the details, but it was fairly recently that they made some changes and included more breaks in there. From my perspective on the reporting side, we kind of drift to the federal requirements. Those have maintained pretty stable. There was a change like 7-8 years ago where they did go to the multi, and that's the only recent change. So if that helps at all.
My question, I think, is for John. If a student wanted to change what they put on their application and felt really strongly, I now want to identify as an American Indian, let's say, can they change that? Or is the record always going to say unknown or white?
They can change
If they
that.
accept
In
that.
fact, that might even be an online option. I don't, but yes, they can. That can be changed. We see changes. We'll run a report one year and then we do it the next year against live race ethnicity data and numbers change. So yes.
I saw you first, so sorry. If it's possible, I'd like to just touch back to the point on PeopleSoft. My name's Allie Cumlin, and I work over in Academic Support Resources. I know that this is a topic that's come up quite often in recent Registrar's Advisory Committee meetings, and I'd just like to put a little note out there that Academic Support Resources is actually looking at preferred gender, or I know that the term preferred is not necessarily what people would like to use now, but just kind of to differentiate legal gender from preferred gender, and they're looking at trying to incorporate additional information. PeopleSoft or Oracle has recently released a new instance where you can add that additional information. So they're just kind of, they've formed a committee and they're looking at how to incorporate that information into PeopleSoft in the future so that students do have the opportunity to go into MyU and maybe select a gender that is not male or female and something that correlates more with what they identify as. So it's on the radar.
So thank you very much. So I work at International Student Scholar Services, and so we pull a lot of data. We're evaluating it all the time, and so then when we go out and we're talking with other people about, oh, you might want to look at this or that. One of the things, especially with simple things like who are our international students in our college, or some very so they want to access that data. So my question is about access, because I don't feel comfortable providing them with access, because I feel like there must be some type of protocol around who can access data. Like for John, do people just email you and it doesn't matter who it is, or do they have to go through a college, a specific person?
A couple different ways people request access. One is they want access to the data warehouse tables, and there's a formal process for that, which I don't have anything to do with. They do an R form, and it goes to the owner/custodian. The thing on the student side is if you get access to DWSA, the student tables, you're either all in or all out. There isn't you get this table but not that table. So that's a different sort of decision.
Most colleges or units have someone in their college or unit who's designated to work with the data? Or
Often there's a data person, and
you have to figure out who that is.
correct. Every individual request is handled individually. They may call whoever they is that signs off. I might be in the registrar's office. Will contact the requester and say, what are you going to use this for? What do you need it for? Do you understand the risks, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's not a black and white thing all the time.
Not really, we should be dedicated to something that we
No, but on our end, we get lots of ad hoc requests where we can pull the data and they want to know. So we're very careful about what we release. And even if we get to the point where, yes, you have the need to know this, we always qualify it. We're giving you this to do this purpose, but you can't hand it off now and don't go posting it on a website. One thing I did want to mention too about international students, there's two ways to define them. There's the citizenship status route, which is also entered, I believe, at the department level, for at least for HR. And then there's the visa status, and those two are not 100% in sync. So they're reported two different ways. And that's been looked at for years, and we haven't come up with the perfect solution. So.
And then this will be our last question.
I understand that in order to protect students or a certain group, if the N is not big, you can't collect that data or that information. Is it possible to collect it but then publish it maybe when the N gets bigger? As years are going by, you're collecting that information, and maybe after 5 years, you publish so that we're not able to identify anybody?
Yeah, we've done that. Sometimes you'll say, somebody says, I want this data for fall 17, and the ends are too small, so then you roll up 5 years together. There's ways around that by collapsing categories. But yes, as long as the whole idea is to protect the students or staff, not just to prohibit people from using the data. We have to be very careful. But yes, that can be done as long as it's satisfies the protection requirements. We can sometimes figure out a way to do it, either by rolling it up or combining years, things like that.
For GradSERU, oftentimes we'll merge, if we have several common programs that are similar programs that are small in ends, we will sort of collapse them into a single one. So I think it's like scientific communication and English, and maybe there's a third one we would put into like English language and literatures, which is the 2-digit SIP or 4-digit SIP identifiers. So when we try not to ever sort of throw this data away, when we try to sort of keep it, and oftentimes we do that by sort of rolling it up and combining it with other programs for the GradSERU, is one way that we do that. But it does sort of become a little bit less useful for programs because it's hard for them to say, yes, this is actually my student, my program responding, or maybe this is other programs that I'm just being lumped into. So.
Thank you. With that, you have one more? Okay. Maybe.
This made me realize is how important it is to have the individuals who decide the questions that are going to be asked to collect the data, that they be diverse as well. Because unless you have their perspective formulating the collection of the data, what we're getting, the data, is